What if you've been living your entire life inside a version of reality that was never meant to show you the full picture? Not because you weren't smart enough to see it, but because it was deliberately designed that way, framed, filtered, and funneled into a narrow window of what you're allowed to believe is real. You wake up, you go through your day, and all around you are signs, patterns, energies, things you can't quite name, but you feel them. Glitches in the flow, moments where time stretches or collapses, intuition that hits too sharply to be dismissed as coincidence. You feel something tugging just beneath the surface. Like reality itself is thinner than it seems. And you're right. There's a reason for that feeling. Because there is another layer to life. One that exists not in some far-off universe or sci-fi fantasy, but right here, interwoven with your every breath. A hidden dimension, humming beneath your daily thoughts, your emotions, your choices. It's the space where things happen before they happen. Where the blueprint of your reality is drawn long before it becomes solid. Most people never catch it because they've been trained not to look. But those who do, those who pause, who feel, who notice, begin to see that the game they were taught to play was rigged from the beginning. Not necessarily in a malicious way, but in a limiting one. The boundaries weren't real. The rules weren't absolute. They were just repeated enough times to become believable. In this secret dimension, things don't move by force. They move by frequency, by the silent rhythm of your internal state. Your thoughts are not just mental chatter, they are signals. Your emotions are not just reactions, they are magnetic codes. Every intention you hold, every belief you nurture, begins shaping the structure of what's to come. You are not walking through a pre-built reality. You are broadcasting the instructions of it moment by moment, whether you realize it or not. And here's where it gets even more real. The system you've been living in, this third-dimensional, push hard, grind harder world, has made you forget that. You've been told that life rewards effort. That success comes only to those who chase, who sacrifice, who suffer the longest. But the truth hidden in plain sight is this. It's not about how hard you push. It's about how precisely you tune. Just like a radio station already playing, your favorite song, you don't create the song by building it from scratch. You receive it by matching the frequency. Reality works the same way. The life you want already exists, not metaphorically, literally. It exists as a vibrational template within this deeper layer of existence. The only thing between you and it is the tuning. That's why the world you see feels so noisy, so fragmented. It's by design. It keeps you focused on the screen instead of realizing you're the projector. You've been taught to fix the outer world while ignoring the frequency that's generating it. But the moment you pause long enough to ask, what if I'm not just reacting to life but generating it? The doorway starts to open, and you start noticing things. The conversation that happened exactly when you needed it. The opportunity that slipped in the moment you stopped obsessing. The peace that entered your body when you finally stopped fighting for it. These are not accidents. They are the echoes of the dimension you've forgotten how to see. This hidden layer isn't made of concrete or walls. It's made of resonance. Think of your life like an instrument. Every thought you hold is a string, every emotion a note, and every belief is a chord that either creates harmony or dissonance with the world around you. When your inner world is chaotic, scattered, or heavy with doubt, the outer world mirrors it. Not because you deserve hardship, but because reality is always listening. It doesn't respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you consistently feel and expect, deep down. That's the current you're swimming in every day, whether you're aware of it or not. Now, imagine what changes when you tune that instrument. When you shift from survival to alignment. When you stop trying to dominate your environment and start co-creating with it. Everything changes. You stop chasing things that were never meant for you. You stop forcing outcomes. Instead, You begin to sense the subtle currents guiding you towards something that feels like flow. That's not magic. That's coherence. That's what happens when your energy stops contradicting itself. When your heart, your mind, and your body begin to agree on what's true. You feel lighter, clearer, more aware. Not because the world has changed, but because you've stepped into the layer where you can actually shape it. This is the part no one taught you, that you are already wired to access this hidden field. You don't need to learn it. You need to remember it. Children access it naturally, so do animals. It's the adults who forget, trained to ignore intuition and replace it with logic alone. But logic can only take you so far. It builds roads, but it doesn't know which one to take. That's where intuition steps in. The quiet nudge, the internal yes or no, the sense that something isn't right even when everything looks fine on paper. These signals come from the dimension beneath the surface. They are your access points, your reminders, your subtle invitations to see what's really going on. But to see it, you have to slow down. You have to stop worshiping urgency and start trusting presence. That's hard in a world that equates busyness with value, that celebrates overthinking and dismisses inner knowing. But the more you slow down, the more clearly you hear it, the secret rhythm of your life. You begin to sense the timing of things. You feel when to move and when to wait. You understand that not all motion is progress, and not all stillness is laziness. Sometimes the most powerful shifts happen in silence, in rest, in the space where nothing seems to be happening, yet everything is reorganizing. Most people miss this because they're trained to look for proof before belief. But this realm works the other way around. Belief is the gatekeeper. You believe it, and then you see it, not the other way around. And this is not blind faith. This is quantum participation. This is you stepping into your role as an observer and creator of reality. Because the moment you shift your attention, your intention, and your emotional state, you are broadcasting a new reality into existence, one that was already waiting to match your frequency. And once you catch even a glimpse of this, your life starts rearranging. Not all at once, not always dramatically, but undeniably. The people around you start responding differently. The timing of events becomes more meaningful. You notice patterns you didn't before. It's as if life begins speaking a language you're finally able to understand. Not with words, but with symbols, synchronicities, and sensations. This is the universe responding to your broadcast. And the more you align, the more fluent this communication becomes. You no longer feel like a victim of your circumstances. You realize you've been in conversation with life all along. You just hadn't been listening. But here's the part that might unsettle you at first. This level of awareness comes with responsibility. Because once you know your state shapes reality, you can no longer pretend otherwise. You can't keep blaming the outside world for what you're broadcasting from within. That doesn't mean everything is your fault. It means everything is your field. It's your terrain to navigate, to feel, to shift. And this is where real empowerment begins, not in controlling every outcome, but in consciously shaping the signal you send. That's the true definition of mastery. Not perfection, but presence. Being so attuned to your internal world that you no longer need to manipulate the external. When you live from this place, you stop reacting and start responding. You stop fearing uncertainty because you know alignment is your compass. You begin to trust that what is meant for you cannot miss you, and what misses you was never meant to stay. This trust isn't naive, it's calibrated. It's earned through experience, through testing, falling, realigning, and watching reality shift in response to your inner shifts. And once you've seen that loop enough times, you stop needing guarantees. You start recognizing guidance in the present moment. That is the quiet superpower of those who see this hidden dimension. They walk with a different rhythm. They move through life with less friction, not because they're lucky, but because they've learned to listen and align. The old way taught you to prove your worth, to strive, to grind endlessly toward outcomes. The new way, the way of the hidden dimension, shows you that the true power lies not in proving but in perceiving, in refining your perception until you can feel the texture of a moment, until you can read the energy of a space, until you can sense when something is meant for you without needing it to beg for your attention. That kind of sensitivity is not weakness. It's a higher technology, one you were born with, one the world made you forget, and now you're remembering. And now you're remembering, slowly at first, like waking from a dream where the rules didn't quite make sense, where you played by someone else's script, never realizing you could write your own. You begin to notice how certain thoughts pull your energy down while others lift it up. You feel the shift when you move from fear into presence, from force into flow. And with each small adjustment, the world begins to move differently around you. You're not just in the world anymore. You're in tune with it, co-creating with it, dancing with something much larger than logic. And this dance doesn't require control. It requires coherence. You begin to realize that your greatest tool is not effort, it's awareness. That alignment is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Because the dimension that shapes your life is not out there, it's in here. And it's been waiting for you to remember how to enter it. The gateway was never hidden. Only your attention was, now you see, now you feel, now you begin. You're stepping out of the frame and into the field. So how does it actually work? How does this secret dimension operate beneath your feet and yet remain invisible to most? That's the question that changes everything. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You realize that this isn't about imagining some fantasy world. It's about recognizing the very real mechanics of energy, attention, and intention that have always been at play. The third dimension, the one most people live in, is linear. You do something, and then something happens. You act, and you wait for a result. But in the deeper layers of reality, the dimension they don't want you to see, things don't operate on a timeline. They respond instantly to your state. This is where quantum thinking begins to intersect with ancient knowing. Science has tiptoed around it for decades. The observer effect in quantum physics shows that the mere act of observing a particle changes its behavior. Not by touching it, not by manipulating it, just by witnessing it. That alone bends the rules. Because if your awareness alone can shape the microscopic, then it's shaping the macroscopic too. Your life is not a series of cause and effect events. It's a field of simultaneous possibilities, each one waiting for your consciousness to collapse it into form. And you collapse it not with action, but with frequency, with alignment, with belief so consistent that the universe has no choice but to respond. And while this might sound like wishful thinking to the third-dimensional mind, it's rooted in real, observable shifts. You've seen it in your life before. You've thought about someone and they called. You've released control over something and it worked out better than when you were micromanaging it. You've walked into a room and instantly felt the energy was off before a word was even spoken. That wasn't superstition. That was perception. You were tuned for a moment to the underlying dimension of energy that connects everything. The difference is, you didn't know you could stay there, that you could live from that place, not just visit it. This dimension doesn't ask you to abandon logic. It asks you to upgrade it, to expand beyond what can be measured with tools and begin trusting what can be felt with clarity. Because the energy you bring into a moment is more powerful than any script you follow. In the secret dimension, what you bring becomes what you experience. When you hold peace, you experience peace. When you radiate chaos, you invite more of it. This is not metaphor, it's vibration, it's resonance. The universal law that like attracts like. Not in some mystical sense, but in a measurable, trackable, repeatable pattern of energetic alignment. And the people who understand this don't control reality. They harmonize with it. They know that before any result comes into form, there is a signal being sent out. A frequency is being stabilized, and that frequency is not random. It's built from what you believe, what you feel, and how you hold those feelings over time. That's the architecture of creation, not the grind, not the hustle, but the internal tuning that magnetizes what you hold as truth. Which means your reality is not a reflection of what you want. It's a reflection of what you believe you deserve, what you expect, what you unconsciously align with, over and over again. That's why change isn't hard. It's just unfamiliar. Because to shift dimensions, you don't have to move your body, you have to move your baseline frequency. So how do you shift that baseline? How do you actually start living from the fifth dimension instead of visiting it in rare moments of peace or synchronicity? You begin with awareness. You begin by watching the thoughts you repeat, not just once or twice, but constantly. You start observing the stories you tell about yourself when no one is listening. Are they stories of limitation, of survival, of just getting by? Or are they stories of alignment, of expansion, of remembering who you really are? Because the stories you tell aren't just narratives, they're blueprints. They carry the frequency that reality responds to. If you keep telling life you're stuck, life keeps showing you the evidence of being stuck. But when you begin to shift the story, even before the outside world changes, the energy begins to move. The frequency begins to rise. That's why emotional coherence matters more than motivation. Anyone can hype themselves up for a few hours. But the dimension we're speaking of responds to sustained energy. It's not about how loud your affirmations are. It's about how deeply you believe them. When things are quiet, it's not about faking positivity. It's about learning to hold truth in your body even when the old patterns come knocking, because they will. The moment you begin shifting frequency, the old energy patterns begin surfacing, not to punish you, but to be released. You may feel resistance, doubt, fear. That's not failure. That's the recalibration process. Like static clearing from a radio station as it tunes into something clearer. You're not going backward. You're stabilizing. And part of that stabilization involves feeling things you've been running from. The secret dimension doesn't bypass emotion. It honors it. It allows you to face the sadness, the anger, the fear, not to drown in it, but to transmute it. In the third dimension, pain is often suppressed. In the fifth, pain is information. It's energy calling to be witnessed, processed, and released. And when you learn to do that, you create space. Space for clarity, space for lightness, space for your true signal to emerge without distortion. You become more sensitive, not in a fragile way, but in a powerful one. You can feel what aligns and what doesn't, and that sensitivity becomes your superpower. In this dimension, time doesn't behave the same way. You'll notice it. You'll begin to feel that some things take no time at all, while others stall endlessly. Not because you're failing, but because alignment hasn't clicked yet. When you're in the fifth dimensional frequency, time bends. Things show up faster, not because you forced them, but because you've become the match for them. Your waiting ends the moment your frequency stabilizes. It's that simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. It takes presence. It takes honesty. It takes a willingness to stop pretending you're powerless. Because you're not. You're immensely powerful. And the moment you start operating from that truth, life can no longer play small with you. This is why this knowledge has been hidden in plain sight for so long. Not because it's hard to access, but because it dissolves. Control. When people begin to live in coherence, they stop needing systems that depend on fear. They stop obeying rules that were never designed for their freedom. They stop identifying with limitation and start embodying expansion. And the systems built on control, on scarcity, on external validation, they begin to crack. Not through rebellion, but through irrelevance. Because a person who is truly aligned doesn't need to fight the old. They simply stop feeding it. They move differently. They create new blueprints by living them. They don't need to convince the world. They let the frequency do the work. So what does it look like to live in this state? Not occasionally, but consistently. It looks like making decisions from alignment, not from anxiety. It looks like trusting the internal signal even when the external world is screaming the opposite. It looks like slowing down when the world demands speed and choosing presence when everything around you is chasing distraction. It's a quiet power, one that doesn't need to shout, compete, or compare. Because when you're truly tuned to the secret dimension, you no longer fear missing out. You understand that what's meant for you can't pass you by, and what passes you by wasn't meant to stay. This kind of confidence doesn't come from ego, it comes from resonance, from being in sync with something greater than logic. And you start noticing something strange. Things come to you. People, opportunities, insights. Not because you chased them, but because you became the version of yourself who naturally attracts them. You didn't hustle for it. You aligned with it. That's the shift. That's the secret. Not to push reality, but to pull it toward you through clarity, emotion, and embodied belief. This is where manifestation moves from a trendy concept to a lived reality. Not about vision boards or scripting the perfect day, but about becoming the kind of person who vibrates with such coherence that life has no choice but to mirror back what you already hold inside. But this isn't about bypassing hard work. It's about reordering it. In the third dimension, action is the cause. In the fifth, action is the confirmation. You don't act to make something happen. You act because something already has. The decision is already made internally. The energy is already aligned. And so the action you take feels clean, clear, powerful, not desperate, not scattered. You don't run around trying to make things work. You simply follow the next aligned step. You don't need to plan 10 moves ahead. You just need to stay attuned to the one that's in front of you. That's how the dimension works. One moment at a time, perfectly timed. And when challenges come, and they will, you no longer see them as signs that you failed. You see them as friction points meant to polish your frequency. You understand that resistance is often a sign that you're stretching into a new field. That discomfort doesn't mean danger. It means decoding. You are being asked to shed the old vibration so something higher can stabilize. That's why so many people get close to a breakthrough and then backtrack. Because the old energy resurfaces right before the shift. And if you don't understand the mechanics, you interpret it as a sign to quit. But when you do understand, you breathe through it. You allow, you recalibrate, and you move forward, not blindly, but with a deep inner knowing that you are now entering a new frequency. This is what it means to live in the hidden dimension. To walk through the same world as everyone else, but experience it through an entirely different interface. You stop forcing, you start flowing, you stop begging reality to change. You begin creating a new one from the inside out, and you do it quietly, elegantly, with intention and grace, not because it's trendy, because it's who you really are. This is not some spiritual high you chase. This is your original state. You're just returning to it. So what happens when you fully stabilize in this frequency? When the hidden dimension is no longer a mystery you visit, but a reality you live in? The first thing you realize is that everything starts feeling lighter. Not because life gets easier, but because resistance fades. You're no longer fighting the current. You've become part of it. You stop needing to constantly figure everything out. You begin trusting that there is a deeper intelligence guiding your path, one that speaks not in words, but in synchronicities, gut feelings, and sudden waves of clarity. You find yourself in the right place at the right time with the right people, not by planning it, but by becoming the version of you that naturally aligns with those circumstances. And when you do need to make a decision, you don't overanalyze. You listen, not to the noise of the world, but to the signal within. Because once you start living from the fifth dimension, that signal becomes clear. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it whispers, it nudges. And you begin to notice that those whispers carry more truth than 1,000 outside opinions. That's when you know you've entered the real shift. Not when your circumstances change, but when your trust in yourself becomes unshakable. You're no longer seeking validation. You're no longer outsourcing your power. You're living in alignment, and alignment doesn't need approval, but that alignment will be tested, because the third dimension doesn't let go easily. It will pull at you through old fears, old patterns, old relationships that no longer resonate. It will try to hook you back into loops of proving, chasing, controlling, and that's okay. You don't have to fight it. You simply don't feed it. You meet the old stories with compassion, but you don't rehearse them. You let them pass. You don't need to argue with the noise when you're tuned to the signal. And the more you stay there, the more your outer world starts to reflect your inner calm. Not instantly, but undeniably, you'll see it in how people respond to you, in how opportunities seem to seek you out instead of the other way around. You'll notice that life feels like less of a maze and more of a mirror, a reflection of what you're holding internally. And even when things don't go as planned, you won't panic. You'll pause. You'll recalibrate. Because you know that if something is falling apart, it's only because it was built on a frequency you no longer hold. The new can't come in if you're still clinging to the old. So you let it fall. You trust the space that opens. And that's when the magic happens. Not because you forced it, but because you made room for it. That's the real secret they don't want you to know. Not just that there's a hidden dimension, but that it's your natural state. That when you're fully tuned to it, you become sovereign, you become powerful, you stop being programmable, and systems built on fear, scarcity, and control, they can't thrive in that frequency. They fade, they lose their grip, not because you attacked them, but because you outgrew them. That's the revolution, not rebellion, expansion, elevation. A quiet inner uprising where you reclaim your own vibration and build a life that reflects it. So what does life start to look like when you've reclaimed that vibration? First, the struggle becomes optional. Not that challenges disappear, but the way you experience them transforms. You no longer see difficulties as punishments. You see them as recalibrations, invitations to return to clarity. You begin to understand that life isn't testing you to break you, it's showing you where you're still holding distortion. And when you shift your energy, the situation often shifts with it. Not by force, but by flow. That's how powerful your frequency is. It organizes reality around it. And when you really live from this space, you don't just create outcomes. You create atmospheres. People can feel it. They feel calmer around you, more clear, more open, because the field you walk in begins affecting the field around you. That's why healers don't always need to say much. It's not their words. It's their frequency, their coherence. That's what the world feels and responds to. And the truth is, you've always had this ability. But most of the world trained you to doubt it, to filter your intuition through logic, to override your inner yes and your inner no, to blend in instead of resonate out. And the moment you stop doing that, even a little, you start to see reality shift. You'll notice it in the tiniest ways. The right song playing when you need it, the call that comes the moment you stop worrying, the solution that shows up after days of mental struggle, once you finally let go. That's the real currency of the fifth dimension, not money, not status. Alignment. When you're aligned, you become magnetic. You attract people, paths, and possibilities that match your vibration. Not because you earned it in the way the third dimension defines effort, but because you remembered how to embody the version of you that already has it. You didn't chase it. You tuned into it. And this shift in being becomes the foundation of everything else. Even your definition of success changes. It stops being about what you can prove and starts being about how deeply you feel, how clearly you live, how peacefully you can move through change. The external wins are still beautiful, but they're no longer your fuel. Your fuel becomes the internal calibration, the deep sustained knowing that you are not missing anything, that life is not happening to you, it's happening through you. That's the most liberating realization a person can have. And once you get it, you stop rushing, you stop comparing, you stop judging yourself by someone else's timeline, because you realize time is an illusion. You are not late. You are not behind. You are right on time for your frequency. And if your current reality doesn't match what you want, it doesn't mean it's not working. It just means your tuning is still in process. You keep aligning. You keep refining. You keep trusting the unseen until the seen begins to match it. That's the process. It's not linear, it's energetic. And the more you surrender to that, the faster things move, not because you're rushing, but because you're flowing. And eventually, something profound happens. You stop searching, not because you've given up, but because you've arrived. Not in a destination, but in a state of being. You wake up in the same world, but everything feels different, more vivid, more connected. You begin to recognize the perfection in the timing of things, even when they don't go as planned. You begin to thank the detours. You begin to see that nothing was wasted. Not the heartbreak, not the failure, not even the years spent asleep. All of it brought you to this moment, to this deeper awareness, to this remembrance of the truth that was never really lost, only buried beneath noise. And now that you see it, you're not here to convince anyone. You're not here to argue for what's real. You're simply here to embody it, to live from it, because your frequency speaks louder than any lecture ever could. And when people feel that frequency, it awakens something in them too. A spark, a remembrance, a subtle shift. That's how the hidden dimension spreads, not through revolution, but through resonance. One awakened person, one aligned life at a time. No need for force, no need for fanfare, just presence, just energy, just truth. This is what they don't want you to know. Not because it's too complex, but because it makes you free. It makes you powerful beyond control. It makes you whole without needing the systems they sell you. When you remember the secret dimension, you no longer feed the world built on lack. You begin building a world based on alignment. And it starts with you, with how you think, how you feel, how you show up when no one's watching. That's the real power. Not how much you control, but how deeply you align. Not how loud your voice is, but how pure your vibration is. You don't change the world by yelling at it. You change it by becoming the frequency that rewrites it. And you've already begun. You remembered. You felt it. You stayed with it long enough to see it shape your reality. That's the initiation. That's the passage. That's the return to your original state. Not broken, not chasing, not lost, but awake, aware, aligned. And when you live like that, the hidden dimension is no longer hidden. It becomes your home. It always was. Welcome back.